ash fell like snow around Jack Petroff as he stared into the mirror's corner, the gallery's fluorescent hum a low thrum beneath his ribs. His reflection in the VHS case blood, mottled ink spelling his name, felt less like a label and more like a wound. The case was cold, slick with condensation, the plastic edges biting into his palms as he rewound it. A dry crackle like parchment tearing filled the silence, then the static, not the familiar hiss of dead channels but a white noise that pressed against his eardrums, thick as wet cotton. It resolved into a whisper. Fatroft. His breath hitched. The word tasted of copper, like the old blood on the case's edge. He turned the VHS toward the gallery's floor, to ceiling glass wall. The forest beyond should have been visible distant pines, the usual urban sprawl. But the glass was opaque, a solid wall. Until it wasn't, a sound like 1,000 dry twigs snapping in half, then shattering. Glass rained inward. Not falling, but tifling from the edges, leaving a jagged hole revealing the forest beyond. The air thickened, clogging his throat with the smell of wet earth, like a freshly opened grave, damp and heavy. He saw his reflection flicker in the glass shards, Byzantine monk robes, coarse wool-stained brown, not his designer jacket. The reflection's eyes held a terrible calm, a calm that wasn't his. Panic clawed up his throat, the cat hissed. It stood rigid in the corner near a display of abstract sculptures made of blackened wood. Its fur was matted, the color shifting subtly. Jack's own fear was a tight knot in his chest, so he looked away. When he glanced back, the cat's eyes were sickly yellow like jaundiced coins. It hissed again, a low, guttural sound that vibrated the air between them. Petrov, the whisper echoed, not from the VHS, but from the shadows behind the cat. The static in his ears formed words. Your name is a lie. He took a step back, his foot catching on something. The ash on the gallery floor, thick, grey, falling like snow crunched under his sole. It was the sound of dry bones being stepped on. The cat's eyes, fixed on the empty space where the forest should be, shifted. The yellow deepened, then flared gold, sharp and sudden like a struck match. The ash under Jack's foot crunched again. A dry, brittle sound. He couldn't move. The cat's golden eyes held him, the forest breathing through the broken glass, the smell of the grave filling his lungs. The ash crunched under his foot. The cat's eyes were gold. The spectacles lay half-buried in the ash, their blackened metal frames splayed like the wings of a broken beetle. I knelt, the grit of the ash grinding between my teeth as I exhaled, and my breath came back thick, copper-tinged, like the first sip of wine turned sour. The lenses were fogged. Not from moisture, but from something deeper, something that pulsed faintly beneath the surface. I wiped at them with the heel of my palm, and the ash clumped around my fingers like dried blood. The gallery's fluorescent light bled through the fog, warping the edges of the lenses into something that wasn't quite glass, more like the surface of a pond where the water refuses to settle. I hesitated. The cat's hissing had stopped, but the air still hummed with it, a vibration that settled in my bones. The forest beyond the shattered glass wall pulsed, the trees not swaying but tree-breathing, their bark splitting open in thin, vertical lines like the gashes on old parchment. The smell of wet earth pressed harder against my throat, not just the scent of damp soil, but the sooty weight of it, the suffocating pressure of a freshly turned grave. I thought of the VHS case, the way the blood had smeared across its surface like a poorly drawn signature. I picked up the spectacles. The moment they touched my skin, the world didn't just change. It quite unfolded. The gallery dissolved into something older, its walls peeling back like the layers of an onion, revealing a labyrinth of stone and mortar, the kind of architecture that had stood for centuries. The air thickened, pressing against my eardrums, and the static that had been a low hum became a chorus of voices, not whispering but screaming, in a language that wasn't language at all, just sound, raw and unfiltered, the way a record plays when the needle skips over a crack in the vinyl. My reflection in the shattered glass wasn't me. It was a monk. His robes the color of sun-bleached bone, his face gaunt and hollow-eyed, the kind of face that had seen too much and forgotten how to blink. The lenses of the spectacles burned against my temples, not with heat but with the toughened memory of it, the searing pain of a brand pressed into flesh. The copper taste flooded my mouth again, thick and metallic, and I swallowed it down, gagging. The monk in the glass didn't move, but his eyes black pits of something that wasn't quite sight locked onto mine. I recognized them. They were my eyes, The static resolved into words not spoken but twin-poled from the air like teeth from a trap. Phew, corrupted. The word hung there, suspended in the thickened air, and the gallery walls shifted, the stone groaning as the space rearranged itself. The display cases of abstract sculptures twisted into something else. Altars, their surfaces carved with scenes of men in monks' robes kneeling before figures with too many limbs, their bodies stitched together from mismatched flesh. The cat reappeared in the corner, its fur no longer shifting colors but twin absorbing them, drinking in the light until it was just a void with eyes that glowed like embers. I stumbled back, my boot catching on something bone, maybe, or the edge of a forgotten display. The ash beneath me wasn't falling anymore. It was Sudin, rising, spiraling up from the floor in slow, deliberate coils, wrapping around my ankles like ropes. The copper taste was everywhere now, coating my tongue, my throat, my lungs, and I coughed, but there was no air to expel. The monk in the glass tilted his head, and for the first time his lips parted. A sound came out of him, not a voice, but the unraveling of one, a child's voice distorted, stretched thin like taffy over a hook, whom Petrov, it said, pure always the lie. The cat's eyes flared gold. The ash coiled higher, tighter, and the world beyond the shattered glass wall didn't just reveal itself. It twitched. For me, the forest pressing forward, the trees bending not with wind but with hunger. The copper taste became a scream, and I knew then that I wasn't just seeing the past. I was steady becoming it. The spectacles burned against my skin, the lenses melting into my eyes, and the last thing I saw before the gold swallowed me whole was my reflection, no longer a monk, but something worse, something Wargry. The cat hissed, and the sound was the last thing I heard before the ash rose to my chin. The curator. Sophis smelled like the inside of a book that had been left too long in a damp cellar. Thick, cloying, the kind of scent that clings to the back of the throat and lingers like a half-remembered sin. The leather chair creaked beneath me. The sound too deliberate, too judgmental, like the thing itself was weighing my worth in ounces of guilt. I kept my fingers curled around the spectacles in my pocket, the metal frames cold against my palm, the lenses still pulsing faintly with that same sickly fog. The curator, Mira, though the name felt like a lie now, sat across from me, her polished nails tapping against the desk like the metronome of some unseen confession. She had been the one to find the VHS tape, or so she claimed. Asterisk Jack Petrov. Asterisk she, said as if the name were a brand pressed into my skin. Asterisk you re the one who left it behind. Asterisk her voice had been too smooth, too practiced, the kind of tone that belongs to people who've spent their lives selling things they don't actually believe in. The gallery was a monument to that. Sculptures of men and women frozen in poses of quiet desperation, their faces stretched thin over expressions of either ecstasy or nausea depending on how you looked at them. ID always thought it was just bad art. Now I wasn't so sure. Asterisk, you shouldn't have touched it. Asterisk, she said now, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. The fluorescent light above her desk flickered, casting her shadow long and thin across the wall like a blade scraping against bone. Asterisk, some things are better left buried. Asterisk, I leaned forward. The floorboards beneath us groaned, not with the weight of my shift, but with something deeper, something that had been waiting. The grain of the wood split open along the seams, thin ribbons of dark sap welling to the surface, the scent of wet parchment filling the air. My fingers twitched. The spectacles. I could feel their weight, their hunger. Asterisk, you know what, us on that tape? Asterisk, I asked. My voice steady despite the way my pulse hammered against my ribs. She didn't answer. Instead, her fingers traced the edge of a framed photograph on her desk. A woman in a monk, her robe, her face half, obscured by shadow, her eyes too bright, too soy olive. The glass over it began to sweat, not with moisture, but with something thicker, something that moved like oil beneath the surface. Asterisk, you think you re the first? Asterisk, she asked, her gaze flicking to the door behind me. The cat wasn't there, but I could feel it. The prickle of fur against the back of my neck, the slow, deliberate scrape of claws against unseen wood, the floorboards tore open. Not split, not cracked, torn, as if something beneath them had reached up and ripped them apart with deliberate, angry fingers. Ash rose in a slow, spiraling column, thick and wet like the dust of a freshly turned grave. It clung to my skin, cold and clammy, tasting of copper and something older, something that had been buried for centuries. The curator did flinch. She didn't even look down. Asterisk, you were always the lie, Jack. Asterisk, she said, and her voice wasn't Tater's anymore. It was the same child's voice from before, stretched thin and distorted, the kind of sound that makes your teeth ache. The static in the air resolved into words, not spoken but poured from the silence like teeth from a trap. Asterisk corrupted. Asterisk, the word hung there, suspended, and the gallery walls seemed shifted. The desk between us twisted, the wood warping into something that wasn't quite furniture, more like the ribs of a corpse, exposed and glistening. The photographs on the wall rearranged themselves, the faces in them twisting into screams. The curator's reflection in the mirror behind her didn't to move, but her eyes did. They weren't hers. They were black pits, empty and hungry, the same kind of eyes I'd seen in the glass of the spectacles. I reached for the mirror, my hand passed through it like smoke. For a second, there was nothing, no friction, no face, just the hollow darkness of a space that shouldn't have been there. Then movement, a flicker, a shape. My reflection was there, but wrong. The angles were off. The proportions stretched too thin, like a drawing made by a child who dared never seen a face before. Its fingers twitched, its lips parted. Asterisk Petrov, asterisk it said, and the sound was the wet terror of parchment. The cat's eyes flared gold in the corner of the room. I stumbled back, my boot catching on something, bone maybe, or the edge of a display case that had just decided to exist. The ash coiled higher, tighter, wrapping around my ankles like ropes. The curator's voice was a whisper now, but it wasn't in my ears. It was inside my skull, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Asterisk, you were always the lie. Asterisk, she repeated, and this time I saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't the curator anymore, she was something older. Something that had worn her face like a mask. The mirror behind her shattered, not from the outside, from the inside. The glass didn't break. It unfolded, peeling back like the skin of a fruit that's been left too long in the sun behind it. The darkness wasn't empty. It was suffused. A swirling mass of shapes that moved without purpose, without sound, just the slow, deliberate, fuddy breathing of something that had been waiting. The cat hissed. The sound wasn't from the corner. It was from everywhere, from the walls, from the floor, from the air itself, thick and heavy with the scent of wet earth, and something older, something that had been buried and forgotten. The static resolved again. Asterisk 42. Asterisk the ash rose to my chin. I pressed the spectacles to my eye. The cold metal a searing brand against my temple. It wasn't pain, not exactly. More like a blooming frost, spreading from the bridge of my nose down into the socket, and then a coil, something tightening, twisting around the optic nerve. A living thread of ice. The world did change immediately. It sharpened. The dust motes dancing in the weak fluorescent light became visible as individual entities, each one a tiny swirling vortex of grey. The smell intensified. Not the musty paper of the gallery, but the wet, earthy scent of turned soil, of something recently disturbed. A grave opened after centuries. My left hand felt numb. I glanced down. The skin wasn't pale, it wasn't even fun. It was unmaking, dissolving into a viscous black fluid that didn't fall, did drip, but flowed, spreading across the floor like ink blooming on damp parchment. The sensation wasn't painful. Not yet. Just wrong. Like watching a photograph fade, the edges blurring, the colors leaching away until nothing was left. The liquid smelled metallic, sharp, like copper and old blood. The cat, perched on a plinth across the room, didn't blink its eyes. They weren't the pale green I'd noticed before. They were a molten gold, burning with an unnatural light, tracking the dissolution of my hand with an unnerving focus. The floorboards groaned beneath me, not with age, but with a subtle, rhythmic flexing, like the breathing of something vast and buried. The walls began to shift. Not dramatically, not yet. But the angles were subtly off. The hallway behind the curator's office wasn't where it should be. It had twin-moved and slid sideways as if the entire gallery were a deck of cards being reshuffled by an unseen hand. The paintings on the walls twisted, the faces within them contorting into expressions of silent agony. The portraits weren't looking fucking me. They were looking through me. I tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but my tongue felt thick, leaden. The ash, which had been a gentle dusting, now swirled around my ankles, rising, constricting, a cold, suffocating embrace. It tasted like grit and bone. The static in the air crackled, coalescing, resolving into something. Deliberate? Not a voice, not exactly. More like a thought, pulled from the silence, scraped from the edges of my consciousness. Asterisk moral, asterisk the word hung there suspended in the air, vibrating with a sickening resonance. It wasn't directed at me, but whoosh about me. A judgment? An accusation. The curator hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still, her gaze locked on mine, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Her eyes were flat, black pools reflecting nothing. Not the light, not the room, not even me. The space around me constricted further. The walls pressed in, the floorboards buckled, the paintings writhed. The cat, its golden eyes blazing, retreated further into the corner, its body pressed against the cold stone, creating a narrowing triangle, a funnel. It was deliberately isolating me. The dissolving continued, spreading up my arm, a creeping tide of blackness. I tried to pull my hand back, but it wouldn't respond. It was as if my body no longer belonged to me, as if I were merely an observer, watching a puppet being disassembled. The static intensified, a white noise that threatened to drown out all other sound. And then another word, sharper, more insistent. Asterisk 42. Asterisk the ash reached my chin. I couldn't breathe! Not from lack of air, but from the sheer weight of it, from the feeling that it was filling my lungs, turning my blood to dust. The walls were closing in, the corners of the room becoming impossibly sharp, the air thick and viscous. The cat hissed, a low, guttural sound that resonated in my bones. The gallery was just shifting now. It was Teufel, collapsing in on itself, trapping me within its decaying embrace. The floorboards tore, and the blackness below widened. I could feel a cold, damp wind rising from the gap, carrying the scent of wet earth and something ancient, something hungry. The cat's eyes flared, and the last thing I saw before the walls slammed shut was the glint of gold. The water was colder than I anticipated. Not just cold, but toughy, thicker, viscous against my skin. It tasted of rust and something else, something ancient and indefinable, like the memory of a forgotten language. The cat, a shadow gliding through the gloom, led the way, its gold eyes twin embers in the submerged wing of the gallery. The air hung heavy, saturated with the smell of wet earth, a smell so potent it seemed to seep into my bones. The ash, which had been a gentle fall, now swirled in the water, a grey snowstorm clinging to the surface, obscuring the already dim light. It settled on my eyelashes, a gritty film that tasted like bone dust. Each step I took sent ripples across the water, disturbing the stillness, the silence. A silence broken only by the futherum of the gallery itself. A deep, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the very foundations. The architecture began to shift, not a dramatic collapse, but a subtle, unsettling rearrangement. The walls, previously straight and true, seemed to breathe. The damp stone expanding and contracting with a slow, rhythmic pulse. It felt as if the gallery weren't built of brick and mortar, but of some living tissue, something organic and unsettling. The water level rose with each shift, pressing against my chest, a cold, insistent weight. I tried to call out to the cat, but my voice caught in my throat, a strangled gasp lost in the watery gloom. The cat didn't acknowledge me, didn't even glance in my direction. It simply continued its silent, purposeful progress, a dark silhouette against the swirling ash. The gallery seemed to be separating to US separating, US the walls subtly angling, the passages twisting, deliberately guiding me away from the feline presence. The static intensified, a crackling white noise that filled my head, drowning out the fervor of the gallery. Then a word, a voice not spoken, but projected directly into my mind, a distorted, childish whisper, laced with an undercurrent of something cold and alien. Asterisk, Petrov. Asterisk, it echoed, bounced off the shifting walls, distorted and fragmented, a mockery of recognition. The word felt like a brand, searing itself onto my consciousness. My left hand, the one that hadn't yet succumbed to the black flow, clenched instinctively. The dissolving continued, a slow, inexorable creep. I could feel the numbness spreading, a cold paralysis that threatened to engulf my entire arm. The water felt colder now, almost glacial, and the ash clung to my skin like a shroud. The cat paused, its golden eyes fixed on me, burning through the gloom. It let out a low, guttural hiss, a sound that vibrated in my bones, a warning or perhaps a dismissal. The walls pressed closer, the passages narrowing, the gallery actively rejecting my presence. It was as if the building itself were a living organism attempting to expel a foreign body. Another word, clearer this time, more insistent, *42. Asterisk, it resonated within my skull. A numerical command, a coded instruction. I felt a surge of panic, a desperate urge to flee, to escape the suffocating confines of the gallery. But the architecture had become a labyrinth, a maze of shifting walls and watery passages designed to trap and disorient. The water rose further, now lapping at my chin, the taste of rust and decay filling my mouth. The ash swelled thicker, a grey vortex that obscured everything beyond arm's reach. I stumbled, lost my footing and plunged deeper into the submerged wing, the darkness closing in around me. The cat, a fleeting glimpse of gold in the gloom, vanished. The static coalesced, resolving into a single, piercing tone. It felt as though my skull were vibrating, my teeth rattling in their sockets. I braced myself, expecting another word, another command, another layer of psychological torment, but there was only silence. A profound, suffocating silence, broken only by the futhrin of the gallery, a heartbeat of stone and water. Then the walls began to move again, faster this time, more violently. They shifted and groaned, the damp stone scraping against stone, the water sloshing and churning. The passages narrowed, the corridors twisting, the gallery actively contracting, squeezing me into an ever smaller space. The air grew thick, viscous, making it difficult to breathe. I felt a pressure against my back, a physical force pushing me forward deeper into the labyrinth. The walls closed in, the ceiling lowered, the floor tilted, creating an inescapable slope. I was being herded, driven like a stray animal into a pen. The gallery was no longer a building, it was a predator. The last vestige of my left hand dissolved, leaving only a black flowing residue on the water. I could feel the coldness spreading, a creeping paralysis that threatened to immobilize my entire body. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. The final walls slammed shut. The air in the gallery had thickened, clotting my throat like phlegm. But it wasn't the dampness of the water or the ash that choked me. It was the memory. Not mine, not even a ghost of one. A memory of him, of the monk who had stood where I now stood, his fingers trembling not with cold, but with the weight of what he had done. The floor beneath my feet pushed, her slow, wet throb, like a heart buried beneath the swamp's blackened surface. I pressed my palm against the stone, and it yielded. Not stone at all, but something softer, something alive, veined with the same blackened tendrils that coiled through the water, creeping upward like roots seeking the light. The ash fell harder now, not as a gentle snow, but as a storm, each grain striking my skin with the sharpness of broken glass. I tasted it, the metallic tang of burnt hair, the acrid bite of singed flesh, and my stomach lurched. It wasn't just ash. It was him, the monk, his body reduced to this fine, choking powder scattered across the gallery like a sacrament of his own execution. The thought clawed at me, but it wasn't mine. It was Sufisi, pressing against the back of my skull, a memory unspooling through the years, through the decades, through the centuries of rotten silence. I turned. The mirror hung before me, a slab of blackened glass veined with cracks like spider webs. My reflection wasn't there. Not at first. Only the gallery distorted, warped as if viewed through the wrong end of a telescope. The walls breathing, the water sloshing, the ash swirling in slow, deliberate eddies. Then slowly, a shape emerged, not me but Fimi. The monk, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow, his lips moving in silent prayer. He was older than I expected, older than time, his skin stretched too tight over bone, his fingers blackened at the tips as if dipped in ink. He wore a robe of undyed wool, the fabric eaten away by something slow and patient, the edges fraying like the ends of a burnt wick. I reached for the glass. My fingers passed through it, cold as a corpse's breath, and the reflection through it shifted. Now it was me, but not me, not entirely. My face was thinner, my cheeks sunken, my eyes sunken deeper still, the irises black as the water at the gallery's depths. The cat stood beside me in the glass, its eyes no longer gold but flint-black twin voids staring back, unblinking. It hissed, low and wet, a sound like steam escaping a broken pipe, and the mirror fufiksh. Not along the cracks, but from the inside out, the glass unraveling like parchment, the reflection dissolving into the ash. The floor twisted. I staggered, my boots sinking into the stone as if it were mud. The gallery rearranging itself around me. The walls shifted, not subtly this time, but violently. The architecture breathing in great, wet gasps. The water rose in waves, not from the gallery's depths, but from the footy walls themselves. The stone weeping, the black tendrils writhing upward like serpents. The air reeked of wet earth, of opened graves, of something surely alive beneath the surface. My hands trembled. The numbness was spreading, creeping up my arms, my legs, my fingers curling into claws, the flesh beneath growing cold, growing twin-black. The cat watched from the corner, its eyes now gold again, burning like embers in the gloom. It didn't hiss this time. It smiled, its lips peeling back from needle teeth, its tongue a forked thing, wet and black as the water. The gallery thurita pulsed again, the floor tilting, the walls pressing closer, the water rising, a voice, not in my ears, not in my head. Inside me, a child's voice distorted, wet, like a recording played backward through water. Where incarnated? The word echoed, not in the gallery, but in my bones, in my teeth, in the marrow of my spine. The floor tilted further, the walls closing in, the water lapping at my chin, my throat, my Sudan, and then the static. It filled my skull, a white noise that wasn't noise at all, but a faux presence, a thing with teeth and claws and eyes, unspooling through the years, through the centuries, through the memories treaty, through incarnated. The word again, clearer now, sharper, a blade pressed against my throat. The gallery thudded. The walls groaning, the water churning, the cat's eyes burning gold, burning sun-black, burning, and then the static resolved into a name, Fotrov. The cat moved with a liquid grace that felt less feline and more calculated. It didn't glance back, didn't offer the usual assessing stare, just a fluid silent glide deeper into the gallery's core, a pull on the periphery of my vision. I followed, boots sinking slightly into the stone, a faint yielding give that shouldn't be there. The air tasted of turned earth, a sweetness clinging to the back of my throat, like the scent of a freshly dug grave. It wasn't the dampness, not the mold, but something older, something buried. The gallery wasn't the same, or perhaps I wasn't. The walls hadn't moved visibly, but the angles felt wrong, the proportions skewed. The space seemed to breathe, to contract and expand with a slow internal rhythm. Each step I took felt less like walking and more like wading through viscous water. The ash continued to fall, coating everything in a fine grey dust, each particle a microscopic weight pressing against my skin. I ran a gloved hand along the wall, expecting cold stone, finding instead a damp, almost fleshy texture. A shudder ran through me, not from cold, but from a deep, visceral revulsion. The cat stopped before a section of wall I hadn't noticed before, or hadn't to sane. It was seamless, blending perfectly with the surrounding stone, yet somehow, different. The stone here was darker, almost black, and a network of hairline fractures crisscrossed the surface, like a spiderweb spun from shadow. The cat sat, its tail twitching, and stared at the wall, its eyes burning with an internal gold light. The shift in the cat's gaze, the subtle flare of its pupils, felt like a directive. I reached out, hesitant, and pressed my palm against the cold stone. It yielded, not with a click of hinges or a groan of stone, but with a soft, almost organic give. The wall wasn't solid. It was a membrane, a surface that breathed and pulsed beneath my hand. The sensation was sickening, like touching a warm, damp lung. The wall dissolved, not crumbling or falling away, but melting into the darkness, revealing a chamber beyond. The air inside was thick, heavy, and stagnant, a suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. The space was circular, small, and utterly devoid of light. The only illumination came from the faint, grey glow of the ash falling outside, barely enough to pierce the oppressive gloom. Then the static began. It wasn't a crackle or a hiss, but a solid white noise that resonated deep within my skull, a pressure building behind my eyes, a tightening in my jaw. It wasn't audible, not exactly. It was felt. A vibration that rattled my teeth and blurred my vision, and within the static a voice, distorted, fragmented, a child's voice layered with static and decay, reincarnated. The word echoed, not in the chamber, but deep inside. Me, a cold, hollow resonance. I fumbled for the spectacles, the metal cold against my numb fingers. The lenses were clouded, scratched, but when I held them up to my eyes, the chamber sharpened into focus. The walls weren't stone at all. They were bone. Massive, interlocking plates of bone, stained black with age and something else. Something viscous and dark, and etched into the bone, in a language I didn't recognize, were symbols. Intricate, looping glyphs that seemed to writhe and shift before my eyes. The cat, still silent, turned its head, its gaze fixed on the wall opposite the entrance. I followed its line of sight, focusing the spectacles. The symbols there were different, larger, more elaborate. A series of repeating patterns, a complex arrangement of lines and curves. And beneath them, in the same archaic script, a single number, 42. The air grew colder, the static intensified. My breath hitched in my throat, a ragged rasp against the oppressive silence. The number felt significant, loaded. A key to something ancient and terrible. A weight settled on my chest, a crushing sense of inevitability. The floor beneath me shifted, a subtle tremor that ran through the bone walls. The cat's eyes blazed, the gold intensifying, burning like twin suns in the gloom. It wasn't looking at me, it was looking through me. The static resolved, coalesced, sharpened. The child's voice clearer now, colder, a whisper against the bone. Petrov, the chamber pulsed, the walls groaned. The floor tilted, and the cat smiled. A slow, deliberate parting of its lips, revealing teeth too long, too sharp, too human. The gold in its eyes flared, blinding, and the last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was the reflection of that smile, stretched and distorted in the polished surface of the bone. The static intensified, a physical pressure against my skull, not just a sound. It tasted like iron, a metallic tang coating my tongue, mingling with the earthy rot already present. My vision swam, the bone walls of the chamber blurring, then sharpening with a sickening clarity. The wet tearing began, a low, visceral rasp. Like canvas being ripped, but deeper, more organic. It resonated within my bones, a counterpoint to the static, a chorus of decay. My hands, I noticed, were shifting. The skin tightened, stretched, pulling taut over the knuckles. A faint sheen of moisture coated my palms, slick and unsettling. I tried to raise a hand to my face to wipe the taste of iron, but the movement felt wrong, stilted. As if my limbs belonged to something else, something not entirely mine. The cat watched, its golden eyes burning, unblinking. The smell of wet earth intensified, almost overwhelming, a cloying sweetness that choked the air. It wasn't just a smell now, it was a texture, a dampness clinging to my skin, seeping into my pores. I felt a tremor run through the bone walls, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to originate from within me. My voice, when I tried to speak, wasn't mine. It was distorted, fragmented, echoing the childish whisper from before. Asterisk, I see you now. Asterisk, it rasped, a mockery of my own tone. The words felt alien, imposed, as if they were being forced from a throat that wasn't my own. My vision pulsed, a rhythmic throbbing that synchronized with the tearing sounds. The bone walls seemed to breathe, to expand and contract with a slow, deliberate rhythm. My legs felt heavy, rooted to the floor. I tried to shift, to move, but my feet were sinking, not into the bone, but into something softer, something yielding. I looked down. My boots were disappearing, swallowed by a dark, viscous substance that oozed from the cracks in the bone floor. It smelled of decay, of turned earth, of something ancient and deeply wrong. The ash, which had been falling steadily, now swirled around my ankles, a grey mist clinging to the viscous substance. The cat moved, a fluid glide across the bone floor, its tail twitching, its eyes fixed on my face. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a tightening in my jaw. The spectacles felt heavy, cumbersome, a weight pressing against my nose. I fumbled with them, trying to adjust the lenses, but they were clouded, scratched, offering no clarity. My hands, they were changing. The skin was thickening, hardening, taking on a texture that was less human, more bark. Like the tearing sound intensified, now accompanied by a wet, sucking noise. It felt as though something was being pulled, stretched, ripped from within me. I gasped, a strangled sound that was lost in the static and the tearing. The bone walls pulsed, the symbols etched into their surface glowing with an eerie internal light. The number 42 seemed to vibrate in my vision, a constant mocking reminder. My reflection, I saw, in the polished surface of the bone floor wasn't teat mine. It was a distorted caricature, a twisted mockery of my own face. The skin was stretched taut, the eyes sunken, the mouth a grotesque parody of a smile. A network of dark veins pulsed beneath the surface like roots burrowing into the flesh. The scent of wet earth intensified, filling my nostrils, choking my lungs. The static reached a crescendo, a blinding white noise that consumed everything. The tearing sound became deafening, a cacophony of ripping and tearing. I felt a searing pain in my eyes, a burning sensation that threatened to consume me. My limbs were contorting, twisting, reshaping themselves into something alien, something monstrous. The last vestiges of my own identity were slipping away, dissolving into the encroaching darkness. Asterisk Petrov. Asterisk the child, as voice whispered, closer now inside my head. Asterisk reincarnated. Asterisk the words resonated with a chilling finality, a confirmation of something terrible and inevitable. My body shuddered, convulsing with a series of wet, tearing sounds. The bone walls seemed to close in, suffocating, crushing. The cat smiled, a slow, deliberate parting of its lips, revealing teeth too long, too sharp, too for human. My voice, strained and fragmented, echoed within the chamber, a final desperate plea. Asterisk, I see you now. Asterisk, the static swallowed the words, consuming them, erasing them. The tearing sound reached its peak, a final, agonizing crescendo. The reflection in the bone floor vanished, replaced by a swirling vortex of darkness. And then, silence. Only the faint, persistent hum of the bone walls and the lingering scent of wet earth. The static began to form a word. Asterisk 42, asterisk. The ash settled in slow, deliberate layers, not as snow, but as the deliberate application of powder, fine, grey, and damp against my skin. It clung to the contours of my face, the ridges of my hands, seeping into the cracks of my spectacles where they pressed against my temples. The lenses, once polished to a reflective sheen, were now streaked with a film of ash, obscuring the gallery's shifting walls. The static hissed, not in my ears but in the marrow of my bones, a sound that vibrated with the same frequency as the gallery. His breath. The walls exhaled. They did not move like flesh, did not ripple like skin. They unfolded, strata of something between stone and muscle, peeling back in slow, wet folds to reveal the gallery's true form. The floor, which had been bone, now pulsed like a slow heart, its surface slick with a sheen of something dark and viscous. The air tasted of copper, of old pennies left to rust in a jar, and the scent of wet earth was no longer a smell but a presence, a weight pressing down on my chest. My fingers twitched. The skin there was no longer mine. It had thickened, roughened, taking on the texture of bark split by frost, brittle and dark. I flexed them, and the movement sent a crack of sound through the air, a dry, splintering noise like the breaking of dead wood. The child's voice was closer now, no longer a whisper, but a wet, tearing thing, dragging itself from the static like a drowned man gasping for air. Asterisk 42, asterisk it rasped, the word dragging out into something longer, something that slithered into my skull. My jaw ached, my teeth grinding against the inside of my cheek. The spectacles slipped, the lenses fogging with condensation. I wiped at them with the back of my hand, but the ash only smeared, turning my fingers grey. The gallery all shifted again, this time not inward, but outward, expanding in slow, deliberate waves. The space between them stretched, warped, and the cat was gone. No hiss, no golden eyes, no fluid glide across the bone floor, just absence, a hollow where it had been. My breath hitched. The gallery exhaled again, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the soles of my feet, through the ash, settling on my tongue. The walls were closing in, not crushing but tubend, absorbing the surface of them softening into something like wax, something like flesh. I could see the texture of it now, the grain of the stone, the slow, wet unraveling of its layers, the way it resisted before giving way, like taffy pulled too thin. My face was melting. The sensation was not pain but pressure, a slow, inexorable weight pressing down on my skin. My cheekbone softened first, the contours of it blurring into the gallery surface. The ash clung to the new, yielding texture, sticking like sweat. My nose followed the cartilage, dissolving into something smooth and pliable. The spectacles slipped, the lenses pressing into the melting flesh of my face. I tried to pull them off, but my fingers were no longer fingers. They were part of the gallery now, part of the slow, wet unraveling. The static hissed louder. The Child-S voice rising with it, *42, asterisk the word dragging itself across my tongue, across my teeth. The gallery breathed again, deeper this time, the walls folding in on themselves, not to crush, but to incorporate. My chest caved inward, not with force, but with the same slow, deliberate pull of wax. The ash fell faster now, not in flakes, but in sheets, clinging to the new, yielding surface of my skin. My ribs flexed, the bones bending like twigs, the flesh between them softening, giving way. The gallery, its texture matched mine now. Not stone, not flesh, but something in between, something that had once been a man and was now something else entirely. The static became a roar, the childish voice a scream, *42, asterisk the word tearing itself from my throat, from the gallery, a throat from the ash settling on my tongue. My lungs expanded, not with breath, but with the gallery slow, wet, unraveling. The walls pulsed, the surface of them rippling like water, and I was part of it now, part of the slow, deliberate absorption. My eyes were the last to go. The lenses of the spectacles melted into the ash, the frame dissolving into the gallery surface. The static hissed, the Child-S voice a wet, tearing thing, *42, asterisk, and then the ash fell like snow, and the gallery breathed, and I was no longer me. The Byzantine gold of the gallery, as walls pulsed beneath the ash, not as a color but as a physical presence, like the slow seep of molten metal through damp cloth. It clung to the stone strata, a tarnished sheen under the fine grey powder that now coated everything, including my own skin. I felt the weight of it, the cold grit between my fingers as I tried to push against the floor, but the surface yielded like wet clay, sucking my hand into its surface. The static hissed, a sound that no longer came from the air, but from within my own bones, and then it coalesced, not a whisper, but a solid crackling formation of letters in the air before me, reincarnated. The word burned with the heat of a struck match, then faded, leaving only the taste of copper and wet earth, like roots exposed in a freshly dug grave. My final thought wasn't mine, it was the gallery, or the static, or perhaps the cat. I turned. Though I didn't know I was turning, the cat was there, crouched in the corner where the bone floor met the wall, its fur the color of old pennies left to rust. Its eyes were no longer the shifting hues of my mood. They were fixed, cold gold, like coins pressed into wax. The number 42 glowed in them, sharp and unblinking, the digits carved from the same gold as the walls. It wasn't a flicker, it was a held thing, a seal. The air thickened around me, the wet earth smell intensifying until it was all I could breathe, all I could taste. The cat didn't move, didn't hiss. It simply held the 42, its gaze locking onto mine like a nail driven into wood. The gallery exhaled again, a deep, wet sound like mud sucking at the soles of my feet, and the door I hadn't noticed before, began to seal. It wasn't to slam. It was a slow, deliberate folding, like the closing of a wet book. The edges met with a sound like the final wet snap of a tendon, then a deep, resonant twin hushi, as if the air itself had been swallowed. The Byzantine gold vanished, replaced by the door surface. Now seamless, unbroken, the color of damp stone. The ash fell heavier, not in flakes, but in slow, deliberate sheets, clinging to the door's new surface. I reached out, but my fingers were already part of the gallery, the skin now a texture of wet clay and gold dust. The wet earth smell was everywhere now, the scent of buried things, and the catty eyes were the last thing I saw before the door was gone. The number 42 pulsed once, then dissolved into the ash. The gallery breathed in. The door was sealed. Only ash and the smell of wet earth remained.